this is Professor Doyle Young. Welcome to section number 3 of the lecture. This lecture is titled Leadership is Developed Through Education and Experience. So, and it's very interesting. I read through this chapter, of course, as the professor, and I looked at the materials, and I did not necessarily want to reiterate all the materials here, but I want to queue up this particular section for you in maybe a little bit different way. The question has become in literature, management literature, how do we go about selecting and promoting, developing leaders within organizations? And the question to this, the answer to this question really lies in sort of the I would characterize as best practices, or how organizations historically have gone through this selection and development of leaders. There is a tension that is set up between a field of management, of leadership, that says that leadership is born, and then at the other end there's a tension that's set up around leadership is developed, and I think the material, the research shows that it's actually a combination of both of these. So let's presume that for the purpose of our discussion, what's involved with the development of leadership. And this particular chapter, is we're going to be getting to that a little bit more. I think probably the best place to start is to say that at some point in the career of a leader, we look at some of the great leaders of history, as I have discussed earlier. Those people have come up through support, come up out of the ranks, of the followers, if you will, and have been selected by senior leadership as a leader for an organization, for a particular work unit or a group of individuals. And so that's historically, I think, typically how people are selected. That, put another way, that ray of sunlight comes down and a person is promoted. But I think, having said that, the organizations that I have worked in, both as an employee and those that I have served as a consultant over the years, really have a fairly structured process about how they go about selecting and developing leaders. And I want to say to students that we're really talking about, at a certain important and fundamental level, the commitment that each of us, me too as a professor, and you too as the student, have to make in terms of our own development. We have to have a focused commitment to what I call lifelong learning. When you really understand, I think, clearly what's going on in the world today, especially in the United States, if you look at the employment patterns historically, when I was growing up as a young person, a young student, people would have roughly 3 careers in their lifetime. Today, that has been tripled. Roughly, people will have 9 different, if you will, careers or employers during their lifetime. And so what's happened is that this whole question of lifetime employment has gone by the way in the United States, and I think maybe even in Western Europe, and selectively throughout the world. So this notion of having one employer lifetime is pretty much been committed to the boneyards of history. Not to say it won't be repeated again, but people know that they can no longer tie their future to the loyalty of an employer. So, for their lives and for the commitment of their career, people are recognizing they have to be committed again to lifetime learning, and to set about, if you will, making plans to advance their education and their career in the very best way possible. Some employers, I have found, of course, have tuition reimbursement, and so they pay all or part of the expenses associated with an education, a college degree, or professional studies, or technical programs. And this is especially true in the United States today, In other parts of the world, I know that's true. But withstanding that, I think that each of us who have that burning desire to extend our education have to really be very thoughtful and programmed and planned about it. Now, as I've sort of given this overview, it's really important for each of us to be focused on the importance of acquiring, I think, at a very fundamental level, knowledge. So knowledge is essentially knowledge. You can test in and out of knowledge, right? So let's say, take me for example. I know a lot about golf, and so I'm very knowledgeable about golf, but that doesn't make me a good golfer. So the acquisition of knowledge, much like in this course that you're in, learning the language, understanding what that language means, learning the concepts, understanding the tools that are available in management and leadership is hugely important. And what are the practices that leaders endorse and use, like best practices? So there's a knowledge which comes with that. And as a student, and as you'll be tested, of course, around that knowledge. That knowledge will you'll test in and out of that with examples of case studies as you get to studying case studies and reports that you submit. And in some courses which you've taken, there will be graded tests, multiple choice, true, false, essay, and so forth. So that's the knowledge base. Even actually before that, as a student again, if I am a professor, if you're in a classroom situation, I'm looking at you individually, and I'm making assessments about how active and engaged you are as a learner. So are you keeping up with the assignments? Are you interactive? Are you participatory in class? Are you carrying your weight in group assignments? And after I've learned over the years, 20 plus years teaching, that students, I can get a pretty good assessment by talking with them, interacting with them, looking at their assignments. And so there's a whole assessment to the acquisition before we even acquire knowledge, as if the person is committed to learning. What are their study habits? And I've had situations as a professor, I've asked people to leave the class because they're not keeping up, they're not keeping their part of their commitment to the other students, and so forth. So the first level is, as an assessment of learning. The second one is the acquisition of knowledge, as we talked about. And the third area is sort of in the competency scaling here that I'm giving you is do you have exhibiting the behaviors commensurate with the knowledge that you've learned? That is, back to my analogy of being a golfer. You can know, like I do, everything there is about golf, but you may not be a good golfer. You may know everything there is about management and leadership, but you may not be a good manager or leader. So that critical third step is really, do we exhibit the behaviors associated with the area of expertise that we have? So here we have, a scaling, if you will, it's sort of at the core of some researchers, very famous researcher. One in particular is called Kirkpatrick. It's a competency development model: assessment, knowledge, and the behaviors associated with it. If you take, for example, some people that you know, that you would characterize, if you get a picture of them in your mind, they actually may be wonderful leaders, you see. And they have the gifts of interaction with people, they understand management, they are visionaries, they're able to put processes together, and these are the people that you probably, or you could, model behaviors by watching them. But actually, with this three-step model, there's a fourth step, and that is, do leaders have what we call business impact, or do they get results? And that is the critical last step, because we could have wonderful leaders in a terrible situation in which there is no impact, or we could have wonderful leaders that are in situations which there is a business impact. So the real, I guess you might say, the acid test for leaders is if they are actually getting the results that come with their job description, with their leadership role. So that is, I would be remiss if I didn't give you this four-step model, and I'll go over it again. It's assessment, that is, in a learning situation, You're being assessed in terms of your ability to be a good learner, okay, and keeping your commitments. Second is acquisition of knowledge. Are you testing in and out? Do you really understand the concepts being presented? Thirdly, as you grow in your role of being a leader, are you exhibiting the behaviors of leadership? And those are, again, are learned, okay? And lastly, is there an impact that you're making in the organization? So you might say that there is, and it's referenced in your book, a spiral of experience that's being referenced in the book. The theory was one of the theories there called the action, observation, reflection model, which says that in that model or theory that making the most of experience is key to developing one's leadership ability. In the spiral of experience in figure 3.1, there's a very active engagement of the individual to learn from the experiences, and the knowledge, again, the knowledge acquisition is very important and key to that. The next level up from the move and beyond knowledge is the behaviors, is the individual is effectively displaying the behaviors associated with their increased effectiveness in these positions and organizations. As we've looked at leadership, we know that that individual is interacting dynamically with the environment around them, with other employees, with work that's being done, with actively learning, dedicating themselves to what we've called before the cycle of continuous learning. They've made a commitment, if you will, to lifelong learning as an individual. So this acquisition of knowledge displays itself in effective behaviors, and the person learns, frankly, with those behaviors and their impact on others by getting feedback, just exactly what happened. So there's an observation period that goes on, watching the impact of the individual's behaviors on others. How did they respond? Was the behaviors appropriate? Was the knowledge applied appropriate to the situation? So what we're really talking about here is, in this spiral of influence, there is a real action, observation, and reflection that's going on with individuals as they move through the maturing, if you will, to the acquisition of the skills, the enhancing of the cognitive abilities, to the application of these kinds in terms of real behaviors. So the individual actually becomes more effective at this. We really know that that while the person shows up, individuals show up in leadership roles hardwired, that the nature versus nurture, that there really are these leadership abilities are acquired. So leadership is really a word that also describes that the development of leadership is acquired as a person is actively engaged in the action, that actually doing things, looking at the impact and observing the impact on others, and actually performance of the organization and reflection. The highest level, if we go back to the earlier sort of scaling, which is knowledge acquisition, the next level is behavior. So the highest reflection or product, if you will, of the competencies of the leader is in actual performance, if you will. Is there a organizational impact? Is it a productive impact upon the organization? If it were in business, what's the impact of the effectiveness of the individual in the leadership roles, and is the performance effective in the organization? So this whole dynamic between the individual and the environment and on the situation is really, the theory comes out very clearly that there's a stepped process, as we've been talking about here, which is really part that leadership development. Leadership is a quality, and learning are truly indispensable to each other. They are very much engaged in terms of the individual and their ability to influence outcomes that are around them. And and candidly, it has been said that leaders lead. So we see leadership as a dynamic process. At one level, that process is very self-serving. That is the tendency to make external attributions for one's own failures, yet make internal attributions for one's own successes. At another level, it's very much an observer. We are, as leaders, observing the impact of the actions that we take and getting feedback about errors that may come from that. And we're making judgments about these things all along. When figure 3.2 in the book talks about the role of expectations in social interactions. And so really what that particular graph is talking to is that we all, as human beings, come into situations in which before we arrive into those sort of interpersonal situations where there's communication going on, we have already set expectations, if you will, of what is going to be happening in that situation. And so our response to those are things that can be in congruity with our expectations, or we may walk out of there incongruous, with incongruity, where things didn't quite go the way we expected them to go. We can confirm those expectations, or we don't confirm those expectations. But a good example would be if you, as a leader, are doing a performance review of someone, and you have real clarity around the actual output or the performance of an individual out of the standards that were set. And a standard of performance is what condition or conditions are expected of the performance of an individual. And then your meeting with them will be to confirm if they perceive those performance outcomes, if you will, the same way you do. And you may walk in with an expectation that there might be a huge gap in perception between you as the leader about anticipated performance and maybe the other individual really isn't quite on board with clarity, if you will. So you're looking for alignment between those two. And the purpose of that meeting around the performance review might be not so much punitive, actually. It might be development. So the person, you would help them work through sort of maybe some skills that they have. And so what you're initiating is a very positive interaction towards the other person that's developmentally focused. Now, it could be that the person responds in a friendly manner and there's congruity around this, or they could say, you know what, I'm really surprised by all of this. And so they've walked in with a sort of different expectation. And we're almost really, in terms of figure 3.2, talking about a situation where we're working at communication by setting up the meeting correctly, by setting the expectations of the meeting correctly, and then looking at making certain that we have, frankly, an outcome that we've set that up as well. That we're there to do review, that's development focus, for example. So these kinds of, this chapter number 3, is really making the point. It's not only learning and leadership totally intertwined. That is, we as individuals committed to developing effective leadership practices, but also that there is a real commitment to the maturity and to our own growth and growth of others as learners. I have learned in organizations as the higher one moves up into larger areas of responsibilities. In the West, we call those C-level leaders. So it's the CEO, the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, maybe the Chief Operating Officer, and a new title that's come out is a Chief Development Officer. And increasingly we have called Chief Knowledge Officer, responsible for the development of knowledge, skills, and abilities or competencies within the organization. So as we move higher up into those roles, that the span of control can get large, both in terms of number of people, budgets, revenues, assets management. So there is an intentionality in organizations, especially those that are committing large sums of money to developing their workers, skill development, training, learning, coaching, counseling, job rotation, job redesign, job enrichment, those kinds of dedication with real dollars and real time for the worker, that there is a real growth. We see that those two are very much entwined. The real commitment that the organization makes to the growth and development of that leader into higher levels of responsibilities. We encourage leaders, and the chapter makes the point that leaders tend to ignore reflection due to lack of time or lack of awareness of its values. This chapter makes a point that intentional reflection by leaders might prompt some to see more potential benefits in experience not initially considered relevant. We always, in the chapters, made this point that there is a real benefit to leaders making a commitment to composting or debriefing with themselves in a very action commitment orientation to a particular situation, let's say, that they've come out of, and how they can be more effective. The book, chapter 3, goes into single loop learning and double loop learning. For example, double loop learning involves a willingness to confront one's own views and an invitation for others to do so too. This is very, very powerful as leaders create environments of more transparency and openness for individuals to really feel part of the team. There's a true collaboration which the leader seeks to build ownership by others in terms of the leader's own performance. We have another word for this. I'd almost call double loop learning exercise in leadership humility. So the book makes a point that mastering double loop learning can be thought of as learning how to learn. And as we're sort of implying here with this interaction between leadership and learning, that once the more effective leaders are really making that commitment to lifelong learning, as we've been talking about before. The book also goes into some talk about the development through experience, the factors that make any given experience potent or effective in fostering growth. Working again with the people, working with the actual work itself and the characteristics of it. Leaders not only getting technical proficiency, but also getting leadership proficiency. In Figure 3.3, it is a very common experience for leaders to start off in technical roles. They might be an engineer, they might be in accounting, they might be actually in marketing or sales, and those can be marketing and sales, very technical. And as the leader is promoted to other higher levels of responsibility, what we see is that the technical skills fall off, and there is a higher, there's more of the leadership skills become more important, the kind of skills that we're talking about here. Okay, so the actual growth in leadership is back again to a set of acquired skills, competencies, and abilities that take into consideration the environment that the person works in and the factors that surround them, or the environmental factors that surround them that they have no control over, but yet they are moving through this experiencing, they're learning from that experience. And for the leaders, what we've learned is that they can, effective development of leadership is really, of course, incumbent upon them having a mentor, a coach, or a boss that can be a powerful catalyst for that person. And leadership also is honed through working with problem subordinates who can stimulate managerial growth. We grow through problems. We grow not only when things are going really well, but we confront situations in the environment that test our skills, that we learn from. And in an ideal situation, the book emphasizes the importance of setting up mentors and mentorees. That's a real commitment by the organization. Mentoring and mentorees is a one-on-one coaching and counseling and development of the individual. We have a word for that in the book that's called executive coaching, which is the responsibilities, it's a general responsibility of all executives towards managers that report to them. So we get further and further into this chapter. It talks about this whole area of further development of leadership task, leadership as a topic that can be developed and enhanced through a changing, dynamic, uncontrollable, and unpredictable environment. So increasingly today, we know, and we've been talking about this very early on in the lectures, that the role of leaders today is increasingly more and more challenging because of the hyper change that organizations and institutions are facing today. That is, change is coming at them faster and faster and faster. It's causing leaders to really question some of the models and approaches they've been using and their effectiveness, like strategic planning done on an annual basis. In a recent Wall Street Journal article emphasized that executives are moving into quarterly strategic planning, that is, going back and reviewing their assumptions they've made, to take a look at the actual performance on a quarterly basis and making the adjustments they need for things that are coming at them faster: competition, technology shifts, labor market availability, talent in the open marketplace, government regulations. So, this risk of failure by not attending to these things is stronger than ever. And of course, it's always been a strong incentive for managers, which is to use change as a competitive weapon, use change as a thoughtful exercise to learn and grow from, but to be monitoring it and to learning and to use that as a basis of growing in those positions. And to be successful, the book goes on to say that learning must continue throughout the life of the individual beyond the completion of a formal task. And figure 3.4 goes into that, and the anatomy of a learning experience. And we just talked about transition and change, how we learn from seeing the results of our learning, seeing the results of the performance. Have we plateaued in that performance? How does that impact turning the corner and making experiences, profiting from those and making decisions? I mean, ultimately, in terms of practical performance, leadership boils down to problem solving and decision making. Okay, if you were to ask me and push me as a professor, I would say my experience in executive and roles and in working with people is it all boils down to the ability of the leader to take a view of a situation and to make decisions as they get more sophisticated, get more organizational experience, making important key decisions and solving those problems, and then working through making certain that the problems that are being solved or the initiatives being put in place are effectively being implemented, if you will, or executed in the organization. So, you're setting up accountability, authority, responsibility, and delegation. It's a dynamic process as leaders to get the organization through those issues. So I'd like to just sort of summarize and come down to the end of this and say that the research is very clear that education level or academic performance and like what as you as students is very positively related to future managerial success, that the individual have educational programs generally have a very positive effect on leadership development. Formal education by organizations that provide education in the form of an in-house corporate university or learning center or mentoring, coaching, counseling further enhances the leadership skills, because those programs tend to be more customized to the reality of a culture, and that ultimately it's really important for the individual to make as a leader, the growing leader, a more effective leader, to their own personal growth, if you will, and to actively seek out programs that are aimed to enhance those growths, whether they're training programs that are seminars or case studies or lectures or having a coach or someone who can work with them very, very diligently in a systemic way to learn these skills. So I hope that you've learned other information in this particular chapter. I think it'll be very effective as we get further into the other chapters and as you look at the factors associated with effective leadership growth. Thank you very much.